you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Who would have thought I would get to Sedona from Hong Kong? Wow. I mean, I've been dead and back, but this is a challenge. I used to be afraid of public speaking. And the first time Wayne Dyer pulled me up on stage at one of his I Can Do It events, I stood there in front of 2,500 people, and I was really nervous. This was just a little over a year ago. And he said to me, "How do you feel?" Right there, while I was standing there in front of everybody. I said, "Really nervous." And he said, "You've been dead and back. What do you have to be scared about?" And I think it was in that moment that I realized that I had nothing to fear, at least as far as public speaking goes. So, you know, you can't imagine how happy I am to be here, not just here in Sedona, but to be alive, to be here physically in this life. Because life is really such a gift. And the sad thing is that most people don't value what they have until they lose it. And so my purpose for standing here and sharing my story with you is because I don't want you to only realize the gift that is life at the point in time when you are about to lose it. I want you to know it now. I had an experience, as you all know. I shouldn't be here. I should have died on February the 2nd, 2006. If the doctors were right, I wouldn't be here. On that day, I was in a coma, and I went into a coma because of end-stage cancer. And as many of you know already, at that point in time, my organs were shutting down. I had tumors, some of them the size of lemons, all over my body, starting from the base of my skull, all around my neck, down under my arms, my chest, all the way down to my abdomen. My muscles were completely wasted away. I couldn't walk. I couldn't really lift my arms. I couldn't even lift my head up. My head was like this all the time. And I weighed about 85 pounds. I would either be sitting in a wheelchair or lying in bed. When I would lie down, I would choke on my own fluid because my lungs were filled with fluid. I had to have the fluid from my lungs removed every few days before it would accumulate again. I had these huge open skin lesions where the toxins were coming out of my skin. And when I went into a coma, the doctors told my family that these were my final hours. Unbeknownst to everyone around me, though, my awareness during that time when I was in a coma was actually heightened. I was aware of everything that was going on around me. I was aware of everything the doctors were doing, all the conversations that were taking place. I was aware of my family, my husband standing or sitting by my bedside, and my mother. My mother was praying to Shiva and Ganesha. My husband was just sitting by my bedside holding my hand and watching the dials above my bed, willing for me to come back. But I was also aware of what they were feeling, and I was aware of everything that even the doctors were feeling and the nurses and everybody who was treating me. It was like I shared their same essence, like I could feel, like I shared their consciousness. But not only that, the most amazing thing was that for the first time in my life, I felt this incredible feeling of unconditional love. It was like I was embraced by this feeling of total unconditional love. It's really hard to describe this feeling because it's much more powerful than any kind of love that I've ever experienced in physical life before. It was truly unconditional in that for the first time in my life, I felt I didn't have to do anything to prove myself or do anything to deserve it. I was loved just because I existed. I felt as though I had always been loved, but had never realized it. In that realm, I realized that I had actually always been loved, but never knew. I also felt as though my consciousness was expanding so that it stretched far greater, much more than the room that my physical body was contained in. I was aware of my body lying there on the hospital bed. But it was as though my consciousness was far bigger than my body, and the body actually looked insignificant to me. And my consciousness continued to expand. And it felt as though time and space was very different in that realm. It was as though I could be anywhere at any time. There was no time lapse, like I could travel any distance and there would be no time lapse. It was as though everything was happening simultaneously. The best way I can describe it is as though I was viewing my life or lives. It was as though I could see what were past lives plus my future, and I could see it all happening simultaneously, as though I was viewing a tapestry. And this is what I mean about it happening all at once. Like when you're viewing a tapestry, you see the entire completed tapestry. There's no time lapse between the time you see this color or this part and that part. I was able to see it all at once. It was as though all my lives were happening simultaneously. Everything was just so clear. And it was like I was one thread woven in that tapestry. I could see where I had been. I could see where I had yet to go. But I could also see there were choices. That if I went this way, this would happen. And if I went this way, this would happen. And there were parts of the tapestry that were still unfinished. I could see all the lives I had already touched and all the lives that I had yet to touch. I became aware of my Father's essence. Now I just want to add here though, that in that realm, because time didn't exist in the way it does here, here we perceive in linear time, where we perceive one thought or one moment of time at a time and we string it together to make linear time. It's not like that there. It's like all of time is existing all at once. So in the retelling of my story, I'm telling it in linear time and I have to give it a sequence. But this isn't the exact sequence in which it happened. I encountered the essence of my Father. When I was growing up, my father and I had a very turbulent relationship because my parents are Indian. They tried to bring me up with Hindu cultural values, but I rebelled against them, particularly because I was actually brought up in a multicultural society. I went to school with British children, but the local people where I lived were Chinese. I lived in a Chinese country and went to a British school. So I spoke 3 languages simultaneously. I spoke my parents' language at home, I spoke English at school, and I spoke Chinese with the local people. And when you're exposed or immersed in 3 cultures simultaneously and you speak their language fluently, you're exposed to different cultural values, and many of these values can contradict each other. And so I used to argue with my parents about their cultural values. I mean, to give you a simple example, in the Hindu culture, you absolutely must not eat beef because the cow is revered as a mother figure. Now, all the kids at my school were going to McDonald's and eating hamburgers. So I couldn't understand why I couldn't do what they were doing. So these kinds of things, as a youngster, I would push against my parents. As I got older, it got a little more complicated. My parents wanted me to have an arranged marriage. I didn't. Finally, they arranged a marriage for me, but just before the wedding day, I ran away, which brought a lot of shame and embarrassment to my family, the groom's family, and to our community. I was ostracized from the Indian community, and my parents were told that no Indian man in our community would ever marry me. But of course I met my wonderful husband. So during my life I had always felt that I'd let my father down. I'd always felt that I'd disappointed him. I always felt that I wasn't good enough. I wasn't Indian enough. I never met his expectations. I felt as though my entire life he was preparing me to get married. It was like his biggest wish was for me to get married. And finally, just a few months before my wedding day, he passed away. So I was really sad when he passed away, because this was the one thing I wanted him to see, was my wedding. I wanted him to see me happy and married. When I met my father's essence in the other realm, I was ready to feel again the guilt or the judgment. But all I felt from him was pure, unconditional love. And I realized that all he had ever felt for me was unconditional love, although it hadn't seemed that way. I realized that love gets very distorted in this dimension, in this realm. In that realm, I started to understand that when we cross over, not only do we leave behind our physical bodies, our physical biology, our bodies, but with our bodies goes our gender, which we leave behind. We leave behind our race, our culture. We leave behind our ego, our values. All these get left behind. So what crosses over? Our essence, our pure essence, our consciousness.